What happens when a prince is stripped of his title on stage, in front of the world, and the cameras catch what he does next? It began with an introduction that should have taken less than 15 seconds. Standard conference protocol. A few words about credentials, a welcome, and the name of the speaker. That was all it was supposed to be. Instead, it turned into the spark that lit a powder keg behind closed doors at one of the world's most prestigious innovation summits. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The NEXUS 2025 Global Summit in Geneva had promised game-changing ideas, global cooperation, and an elite gathering of some of the most influential minds across technology, philanthropy, diplomacy, and culture. But it wasn't the headline panels or major announcements that stole the show. It was what happened after Prince Harry took the stage, more specifically, what happened when he left it. The moment CEO Rachel Gerol walked to the microphone to introduce him, the room shifted. She looked polished, professional, and unbothered as she read from her prepared notes. Cameras flashed. Attendees leaned forward. And then, she delivered the line that no one in the room, least of all Prince Harry, was prepared for. Please welcome our next speaker. Mr. Harry Windsor. That was it. That was the sentence. Not His Royal Highness. Not Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. Just Mr. Harry Windsor. In that instant, every face in the auditorium registered something: confusion, tension, curiosity. A beat of silence followed. Harry, visibly caught off guard, smiled stiffly and walked to the podium. But something was different. The air felt tight. He hesitated at the mic. Eyewitnesses later described his expression as a mix of controlled fury and disbelief. What followed on stage was awkward, even painful to watch. His speech began as expected, a collection of remarks on mental health, global responsibility, and the importance of truth in modern leadership. But his tone felt clipped, rehearsed, disconnected. And with every word, the tension in the room built, not because of what was said, but because of what had already been set in motion. After just 12 minutes into his speech, he glanced toward stage left. His hand trembled slightly as he turned a page. Another scan of the crowd, then a pause. No acknowledgement. No applause. Just dead air. Without warning, he slammed his notes onto the podium. Not gently. Not accidentally. Eyewitnesses say the papers fluttered to the floor as he stepped back. With clenched fists and flushed cheeks, he muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked off stage. It wasn't part of the schedule. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was an exit, sharp, emotional, unplanned. Behind the curtain, chaos erupted. Multiple sources now confirm what had previously only been whispered. Backstage, in a secured VIP holding area, Prince Harry confronted Rachel Gerol directly. Not through an aide. Not via email. In person. Loudly. Furiously. "You don't get to decide that," he reportedly shouted. "You don't get to take that away from me on a stage like that. Do you know what I gave up? Do you know what I lost?" Gerol, standing her ground, is said to have calmly replied, "This isn't Buckingham Palace. We don't use royal titles on this platform." And that was the moment the dam broke. Harry exploded, according to several staffers who were within earshot. His voice echoed through the hallways. Aides scrambled. Event security quietly intercepted press trying to access the hallway. Some said it was one of the most intense private meltdowns they had ever seen from a public figure. But here's the twist, one nobody saw coming. Rachel Gerol, unshaken and reportedly disgusted by the scene, leaked the footage herself. The video was captured on a private hallway surveillance feed meant for internal event security. It was muted, but Gerol, as CEO, had full access. According to insiders, she reviewed it later that evening and made a deliberate decision. She instructed her team to release a segment of the altercation to a confidential media source. She wanted the world to see what she saw, a man who demanded reverence, not respect. A man who believed he was owed something not because of what he said, but because of who he once was. And so, just hours after the summit wrapped, the clip was online. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media exploded. The clip, grainy, black and white, timestamped 1742 Greenwich Mean Time, showed Harry pointing, pacing, and clearly shouting at Gerol. No audio. Just silent fury. Just a body language that couldn't be mistaken. An unfiltered, unguarded moment of entitled rage. Commentators from both sides of the Atlantic weighed in. Some called Rachel Gerol brave. Others accused her of unprofessionalism. Royal experts and culture critics debated over protocol and respect. But one thing was clear. This moment had pierced the veil of carefully managed optics Harry and Meghan had spent years constructing. Because this wasn't Oprah. This wasn't Netflix. This wasn't a controlled documentary or a curated podcast. This was raw. This was unscripted. This was a man, once revered as a royal symbol of humility and resilience, reduced to demanding his title like a celebrity diva demanding a dressing room upgrade. The question echoed everywhere. Who is Prince Harry without the prince? And does the answer scare him more than it scares the rest of us? The fallout was immediate. Articles dissected every second of the clip. A new round of memes emerged comparing Harry to other disgraced royals or fading celebrities grasping at relevance. Public support began to fracture, with some former fans openly saying they were done defending his behavior. Gerol, for her part, doubled down. In a statement released the following morning, she wrote, "Respect is not inherited. It's earned. Every speaker at our summit is introduced without titles. Mr. Windsor was no exception. That was our policy, and he was informed ahead of time." His response behind closed doors speaks for itself. No denial. No apology. Just facts and a bold refusal to coddle a public figure who, in her view, was using his past to mask his present behavior. This video will take you deeper into every layer of this story. Not just what happened, but why it matters. Why it exploded across headlines. Why it rattled not only a room full of world leaders and CEOs, but also the fragile ecosystem of royalty, celebrity, and entitlement in the 21st century. We'll explore who Rachel Gerol is and why her stance matters. We'll examine the exact moment the summit turned sour and what the silent tension in the audience reveals about Harry's current standing among the global elite. We'll decode the footage, listen to expert insights, and uncover what this means for the future of Prince Harry's brand and the couple's dwindling influence on the global stage. Because if one thing is clear after NEXUS 2025, it's this. When titles are stripped away and the curtain is pulled back, what remains is the truth of character. And for Harry Windsor, the truth might be harder to face than he ever imagined. When the NEXUS 2025 summit was first announced, it was billed as one of the most exclusive, ambitious, and globally resonant leadership forums of the decade. The invitation-only event was slated to take place in Geneva, Switzerland, a city often chosen for its neutrality, elegance, and symbolic association with diplomacy. The event promised to bring together visionaries, tech moguls, humanitarian leaders, cultural influencers, and former heads of state, all under one roof. It was marketed not merely as a conference, but as a movement, something historic. The lead-up to NEXUS 2025 was rife with speculation and excitement. Scheduled just 6 months after the World Economic Forum in Davos, this summit was intended as a counterbalance, less elitist in tone but equally powerful in its ambition. While Davos leaned heavily on economic paradigms and corporate growth strategies, NEXUS emphasized innovation with empathy, leadership with accountability, and impact with measurable social return. Organized by a coalition of global NGOs, progressive foundations, and private sector partners with billion-dollar portfolios, the summit drew a careful balance between political neutrality and moral assertiveness. Its slogan, "Lead the Now, Shape the Next," was splashed across social media, displayed on minimalist banners in the Palais des Nations, and echoed in dozens of pre-event panel previews. The goal was clear: to reimagine global leadership in a time of moral crisis, climate threat, digital surveillance, and fractured international cooperation. And this was precisely the kind of stage Prince Harry had been increasingly drawn to in recent years. Since stepping away from his formal royal duties in 2020, Harry had crafted a new persona, one part activist, one part entrepreneur, one part celebrity thought leader. His ventures with Archewell, podcast appearances, docuseries productions, and keynote speeches had cemented his identity as a speaker on mental health, military trauma, misinformation, and the responsibilities of the elite. So when it was confirmed that he would deliver a keynote at NEXUS 2025, many were unsurprised. His name still drew attention. His presence could still move headlines. And for NEXUS, having Harry on their list of speakers added both a layer of cultural buzz and political complexity. Behind the scenes, however, things were less seamless. According to several conference organizers, Harry's team had requested specific accommodations ahead of time. These included logistical security requests, expected for a high-profile figure, but also more nuanced demands. There were preferences about seating arrangements during panels, media blackout zones, and even an expressed wish that promotional materials refer to him as Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. This request immediately ran afoul of the NEXUS Summit's long-standing protocol. Since its inception, the summit had a strict rule. All speakers were to be introduced by their legal names, without royal, noble, or ceremonial titles, regardless of their background. This wasn't new. In fact, it had been enforced in previous summits when European aristocrats and Middle Eastern royals took the stage. Everyone was addressed on equal footing, a philosophical nod to the summit's egalitarian mission. Rachel Gerol, CEO of the organizing committee and known for her razor-sharp adherence to principles, made the decision early on that there would be no exceptions. In internal emails later leaked, she wrote, "We don't elevate symbols of hierarchy. He will be introduced the same way everyone else is. If that's not acceptable, he can withdraw." He didn't, at least not officially. Harry confirmed his attendance, and his keynote was positioned as the closing talk on day 2, a primetime slot traditionally reserved for figures meant to galvanize the audience. He was slotted to speak after a global health panel featuring doctors from WHO, and just before a fireside chat with the CEO of one of Silicon Valley's largest artificial intelligence firms. The atmosphere leading up to his speech was tense but composed. Most attendees weren't aware of the title dispute brewing behind closed doors. They arrived that morning to a packed schedule featuring workshops on climate impact investing, sessions on neurodivergent leadership, and surprise addresses by Nobel laureates. There was no hint that the summit would soon be overshadowed by an outburst from one of its most celebrated guests. Geneva's International Press Corps, however, had been whispering about the title controversy for days. A few journalists covering the event had caught wind of behind-the-scenes disagreements. An unnamed staffer hinted at a brewing storm between Gerol and Harry's team. Another mentioned a tense standoff about protocol. Yet none of this made it to official publications until it erupted live. The room where Harry was to speak was built like an auditorium meets tech exhibit hybrid. Soft LED lighting washed the stage in a cool blue hue. White leather chairs were arranged in rows, curved to make even the furthest seats feel close. A minimalist stage bore nothing but a lucite podium and a massive digital backdrop displaying the speaker's name, affiliation, and theme. When the time arrived, the crowd slowly filed in from the breakout sessions. Some were excited to hear Harry's speech. Others were simply there because of the hype. There were murmurs, snippets of conversation in French, English, German, Mandarin, many of them referencing his past speeches and global presence. A few younger attendees clutched programs and scrolled Twitter for updates. Older dignitaries exchanged business cards quietly. The air was filled with anticipation, the kind that often precedes either a breakthrough or a disaster. Rachel Gerol took the stage with practiced calm. Her role as MC had seen her introduce dozens of speakers over the last 2 days, and she did so with confidence and brevity. But this moment was different. She held the microphone a second longer. She looked down at her card, then back up. "Our next speaker," she said, "has been a leading voice on mental health, veterans reintegration, and the ethics of global leadership. Please welcome Mr. Harry Windsor." There it was. No royal titles. No unnecessary flattery. Just his name. For most in the audience, it meant little. For others, particularly those aware of royal etiquette, it was striking. A ripple passed through the room. Harry emerged from the wing and took his place at the podium. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, no insignia, no medals. Just a clean, corporate look. His eyes briefly flicked toward Gerol, then to the audience. What the cameras didn't capture, but what multiple sources later confirmed, was the icy energy that followed. He hadn't expected it. He had assumed some compromise would be made, perhaps that Rachel would bend, or that at least his formal titles would be used out of courtesy. They weren't, and thus, everything that followed. His awkward delivery, the uncharacteristic loss of composure, the storm backstage can be traced back to that single moment. That quiet defiance. That refusal to play by rules of legacy and rank. In many ways, the NEXUS Summit wasn't just a backdrop for this conflict. It was the perfect stage for it. Here was an event built on flattening traditional power hierarchies. An event that saw CEOs, refugees, scientists, and students as peers. A stage that prided itself on intellectual contribution, not inherited status. To walk into that arena expecting deference based on title was not only out of step, it was contrary to the ethos of the summit itself. And yet, despite this clear philosophy, the world saw something else unfold. a public figure walking into a space that no longer bowed to him, and cracking under that realization. As journalists began piecing together what had happened, both on stage and off, more details emerged. Some attendees claimed Harry had visibly hesitated before starting his speech. Others said he skipped over parts of his prepared remarks. A few said he kept glancing down at his notes in disbelief, as if trying to steady himself from an internal spiral. What's critical to understand is that the summit didn't fall apart. No fire alarms were pulled. No mass walkouts occurred. The world kept turning. But the rupture, both symbolic and personal, was undeniable. And by the time Harry left Geneva that evening, the buzz around his speech had already overtaken every other headline from the event. Not the climate breakthrough. Not the refugee tech initiative. Not even the multi-billion-dollar AI development deal announced during day one. It was this moment, this misstep, this clash of identity, expectation, and ego on a stage meant to inspire a new kind of leadership. A leadership that, clearly, some were not yet ready to embrace. Before she became the woman who stood up to Prince Harry on the global stage, Rachel Gerol was already known as one of the most formidable and quietly influential figures in the world of cross-sector leadership summits. But to understand why her introduction of Harry as Mr. Harry Windsor triggered such a moment of global conversation, and why her decision to leak the backstage footage carried so much weight, you have to understand the woman behind the microphone. Rachel Gerol wasn't born into wealth, royalty, or global fame. She was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in 1981 to two public school educators. Her upbringing was humble, but marked by intellectual curiosity and a strong sense of justice. As a child, Rachel was the type to question authority, not with rudeness, but with relentless logic. Her former teachers described her as a precise thinker, someone who saw through performance and demanded substance. She went on to attend Northwestern University, where she double-majored in political science and social impact design, a then-experimental track that allowed students to integrate design thinking with nonprofit and political strategy. During her senior year, she led a student delegation to the United Nations Youth Assembly, an experience that would alter the trajectory of her life. What she saw there, diplomatic inertia, rigid bureaucracy, and the slow-moving machinery of international cooperation, both inspired and frustrated her. While many students returned home impressed by the prestige of it all, Rachel came back critical. She began writing essays and giving talks on the need for more agile, less title-obsessed institutions. Her core belief, developed in these formative years, was simple but radical: progress must come from people, not from positions. After a brief stint at a Chicago-based social innovation nonprofit, she launched her first major venture, a startup incubator for civic tech solutions. It was 2007, a time when tech for good was still a niche idea. Under her leadership, the incubator gave birth to tools used by municipal governments across the U.S., including apps for emergency response coordination, public transparency platforms, and civic engagement campaigns. But it wasn't until the early 2010s that she stepped onto the international stage. In 2012, she was invited to speak at a global youth conference in Nairobi. Her address, focused on dismantling the psychological architecture of inherited power, resonated beyond the audience. A video of her speech was uploaded to YouTube and went viral in activist circles. That talk, where she posed the question, if titles could save the world, why are we still failing, catapulted her into a new orbit. Over the next decade, she became a sought-after voice in cross-sector events, invited to moderate, keynote, and organize global gatherings focused on sustainable development, ethical tech, and systemic reform. She built a reputation not just for her ideas, but for her clarity. Rachel didn't believe in corporate jargon or diplomatic fluff. She demanded transparency, brevity, and measurable outcomes. It was during this time that she co-founded what would later become the NEXUS Summit, a space where policymakers, technologists, educators, artists, and entrepreneurs could not only share ideas, but collaborate on tangible solutions. The summit's success was in large part due to her vision: eliminate traditional hierarchies, force conversation across silos, and demand action over applause. But Rachel Gerol wasn't content with the role of backstage organizer. She believed in visibility with purpose, and so she often took the stage herself, introducing speakers, moderating panels, and setting the tone. Her approach was different from what one might expect. No fawning introductions, no reverent tone. She introduced everyone, be they billionaires, generals, or pop stars, the same way: by their name and their contribution. To Rachel, a title was not a substitute for merit. In fact, it was often a red flag. Privately, colleagues said she had grown tired of the performative humility of elite figures, the ones who claimed to step down from privilege while still demanding its perks. She had seen the way some speakers treated staff backstage, the way they insisted on private exits and ego-massaging green rooms. She wasn't impressed. And she certainly wasn't going to bend the rules for someone just because the press still called him Prince. When Harry's team requested that he be introduced as Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, her answer wasn't delayed or emotional. It was immediate. No, she reportedly said. That's not how we do things. Emails later leaked from Summit staff confirmed this. One message from Rachel to the speaker logistics team read, "Please use his legal name. He is not here to be bowed to. He is here to participate in a space of equals." Period. This wasn't about Harry personally, at least not at first. It was about a policy she'd applied consistently to everyone. At a previous summit, she had introduced a Middle Eastern prince as Ahmed Al-Falon, founder of the Future Desert Initiative, leaving out his full string of royal titles. When asked about it in an interview, she shrugged and said, "Either we mean what we say about equality, or we don't. Titles don't impress me. Ideas do." It was this ethos that framed her interaction with Harry. When he took the stage, her role was already done. She didn't hover, didn't smile from the wings, didn't signal admiration. She returned to her seat among other organizers and let him speak. What she hadn't anticipated, perhaps, was the extent of the internal implosion her introduction would provoke in him. Still, when the backstage explosion happened, those close to Rachel say she didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stared back at him and said, "You're not being disrespected. You're being treated equally." That statement, those 8 words, would go on to appear on protest signs, social media banners, and op-ed headlines in the days that followed. But it was her decision after the event that would elevate her from being a behind-the-scenes figure to the center of global conversation. She watched the footage privately first. It wasn't high definition. It didn't have sound. But the body language was unmistakable. She saw herself standing still, arms crossed, while Harry gestured wildly and pointed toward the stage. She watched him pace, watched a staffer try to interject and get waved off. She saw the moment his finger jabbed the air just inches from her face. For Rachel, that video wasn't just about her. It was about what the public doesn't get to see, the entitlement that too often goes unchecked, the clash between image and reality, the space between the version of a person that appears on magazine covers and the one who, when challenged, lashes out. She thought long about whether to release it. It wasn't a decision made in anger, according to people in her circle. It was made after consultation with advisors, legal counsel, and trusted colleagues. She knew there would be backlash. She knew the headlines would be sensational. But she believed the public had a right to see the truth. Not to humiliate Harry, but to reveal a deeper tension about how we treat status, deference, and leadership in the modern age. When she leaked the footage, she didn't do so anonymously. That alone was telling. She took responsibility immediately. She didn't hide behind media leaks or third-party sources. She owned the narrative and released a short statement. This footage shows a man demanding respect for his title. Our summit respects people for their actions. I stand by how he was introduced. And I will not be silent just because the person raising his voice has a famous last name. The reaction was explosive. Half the internet praised her. The other half accused her of betrayal. Media outlets scrambled to analyze her background, her motives, her every prior statement. But Rachel Gerol didn't flinch. She went quiet, didn't chase interviews, didn't milk the moment. She simply stood still while the storm raged around her. And perhaps that is why she emerged from this story not just unscathed, but elevated. Because while others shouted, she stayed composed. While others maneuvered, she stood her ground. And while one former prince demanded recognition, she reminded the world that recognition must be earned, not inherited. It was supposed to be a moment of inspiration, a crescendo, a keynote that would leave the audience stirred, united, and thinking differently about leadership, truth, and the future. Instead, what unfolded on that stage became a defining example of the very disconnect Prince Harry had warned the world about for years, the difference between image and authenticity, between power and purpose, and, most glaringly, between earned respect and expected reverence. The stage had been prepared with meticulous care. Lighting technicians calibrated each spotlight to avoid glare. Audio crews ran triple checks on the wireless lapel microphones. Event designers adjusted the height of the podium to suit Harry's 6'1" frame. Rows of chairs were refitted to ensure even spacing, providing every delegate an unobstructed view. The team behind the NEXUS 2025 summit knew how much attention this keynote would receive and how many people around the world would be watching. As the day wore on, anticipation swelled in the main hall. Attendees trickled in from adjacent breakout sessions. Some carried paper programs, while others consulted the mobile event app, which prominently featured Prince Harry as the closing speaker of the afternoon segment. Screens along the walls displayed his official photo, one where he looked calm, determined, wearing a dark suit and no royal insignia. The accompanying text read only, Harry Windsor, co-founder, Archwell Foundation. Backstage, Harry's aides moved with tight-lipped urgency. They checked his speech notes one last time. They ensured water was placed exactly 2 inches from the right edge of the podium, as per his request. They reminded each other to avoid eye contact during his pre-speech meditation, a habit he picked up in recent years to center himself before major appearances. But tension was already bleeding through. Even before he stepped on stage, something felt off. Insiders would later say he was irritable from the moment he arrived that morning. A scheduling mishap at his hotel. A misquoted statement in a European tabloid. A delayed courier delivering his preferred tailoring adjustments. All small issues, but they compounded in the hours leading up to his speech, tightening the emotional coil inside him. One aide whispered afterward, he came in feeling disrespected. The introduction just detonated everything. That introduction was the spark. When Rachel Gerol took the stage, she did so with her trademark composure. Wearing a neutral gray pantsuit and a discreet wireless mic, she began with a short welcome to the afternoon session. The audience quieted. Some sipped coffee. Others checked their watches. She scanned the room once, then glanced down at her prepared notes. Our next speaker, she said, voice steady, has worked to champion the mental health of veterans, challenge the global misinformation crisis, and support innovative philanthropy aimed at systemic change. Please welcome Mr. Harry Windsor. No more. No less. There was a flicker in the room. It was almost imperceptible, like the sharp intake of breath before a sudden silence. A few eyebrows lifted. Phones rose slightly to record. There was a sense, among those tuned into subtleties, that something significant had just occurred. And in the next 10 seconds, that sense would be confirmed. Harry walked out briskly. His gait was firm but slightly mechanical. He offered a shallow smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Approaching the podium, he adjusted his collar as if shaking off invisible weight. Then he stood still for a moment longer than expected. Just long enough to seem thrown. Just long enough to tell everyone in the room, something's wrong. He began speaking, eyes cast downward at his notes. Thank you for that thoughtful introduction, he said. Some chuckled politely. Others shifted uncomfortably. The phrasing felt passive-aggressive, sarcastic, even. And as the room settled back into quiet, Harry launched into his prepared remarks. The speech itself was crafted in the kind of inspirational cadence that had become his signature. He spoke of isolation among veterans, of the dangers of misinformation, of the importance of empathy and leadership. His voice, naturally deep and earnest, carried through the hall with practiced rhythm. He referenced his mother, Princess Diana, indirectly, speaking about how the people who walk away from titles are often the ones who understand freedom best. But even this line, seemingly self-aware and poignant, was undercut by the tension radiating off him. He spoke faster than usual. He paused less. He gripped the sides of the podium tighter. And then, about 9 minutes in, came a moment that would later be dissected by analysts, journalists, and behavioral psychologists alike. He delivered a sentence that was meant to stir applause. And when we choose truth over tradition, people thrive. Institutions heal. Futures open. He paused. Waited. Nothing. No applause. No nodding. Just silence. It was a silence that seemed to stretch for hours but lasted only 2 seconds. Yet those 2 seconds did more damage than any heckle could have. Harry's expression stiffened. His jaw clenched. He glanced sideways, first at the left side of the room, then toward the tech booth, as if unsure whether he was even being heard. The moment lingered like smoke. He recovered quickly on the surface. Continued reading. But that single pause shifted the tone. From then on, every word felt more strained. Less impassioned. Less engaged. He read through the rest of his prepared remarks with a kind of emotional autopilot. A few lines elicited scattered nods, but the fire was gone. The authenticity that once made his speeches feel intimate was nowhere to be found. And then came the ending. It was abrupt. He skipped 2 paragraphs, confirmed by comparing the teleprompter feed with the final video. He closed with a flat sentence. "Thank you for your time." That was it. No call to action. No warm farewell. No reference to the summit's goals. He stepped away from the mic. And just before he turned, he slapped his notes against the podium. Not hard. Not theatrical. But enough to make a sound that echoed through the mic. A few pages fluttered to the ground. Attendees blinked. Security leaned forward. Rachel Gerol stood still at the far edge of the wings, watching. Without picking the pages up, Harry walked off the stage. Behind the curtain, one staffer rushed to retrieve the fallen papers. Another tried to signal the next speaker to prepare early. But the buzz had already begun. Guests whispered. Journalists began typing. Phones buzzed with notifications. The summit's group chat, used by organizers, was flooded with a single question. What just happened? The answer was more complex than it looked. Some argued that Harry had simply had a bad day. Others speculated that the title issue had deeply rattled him and made it impossible for him to deliver his message with full conviction. A few in the audience quietly questioned whether he had prepared enough or if his heart was truly in it. But regardless of the theory, everyone agreed that was not the speech they had expected. One attendee, a global education activist, told reporters later, "It felt like we were witnessing someone go through something live. Not in a good way. Like he wasn't performing, but unraveling." Another, an executive from a multinational NGO, said, "We were told to expect royalty. What we saw was resentment. And resentment, in this case, had little to do with content." Harry's words, on paper, were thoughtful and impassioned. But the delivery, the energy, the pauses, the tension, told a different story. A story of a man wrestling with the limits of his reinvention. A man who had walked away from royal duties but still felt wounded when the world didn't give him the reverence those duties once demanded. When analyzed later by speech coaches and body language experts, Harry's behavior on stage was dissected frame by frame. His tightened throat muscles, quickened pace, and blink rate all suggested internal stress. Some noted that he rubbed his wedding ring 3 times during the speech, a known self-soothing gesture. Others observed his right hand tremble slightly when he turned the second page. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like nerves. But to those familiar with his past performances, including his celebrated UN address or his heartfelt Invictus Games speeches, this was not nerves. This was something else entirely. This was controlled anger, restrained confusion, and the unmistakable burden of perceived disrespect. The irony was staggering. Here he was, speaking about the dangers of ego in leadership, while visibly wounded that his own ego hadn't been catered to. He spoke of dismantling tradition, while seemingly furious that one had been dismantled in his presence. His own royal tradition. And so, what should have been a rallying cry became a cautionary tale. As Harry exited the stage and disappeared behind the curtain, the audience remained in their seats longer than usual. There was no standing ovation, no rush to shake hands. People checked their devices, traded glances, and tried to process what they had just witnessed. This was no ordinary keynote gone slightly off script. This was the unraveling of an image in real time. The moment was recorded in its entirety by the summit's in-house video crew. That raw feed, unreleased to the public but confirmed by several editors, shows everything: Rachel's stoic introduction, Harry's reaction, the failed applause moment, the stiff exit. The leaked footage from backstage that would emerge later was simply the aftershock. The real earthquake happened here, in front of everyone, and its tremors would reverberate for days. The onstage misfire was more than just a personal embarrassment. It was a moment that punctured the myth of Prince Harry as a universally adored, morally unshakable speaker. It reminded the world that titles may be shed, but identity struggles linger. That when respect is expected but not earned, the fallout is not just personal, it's public. The applause had barely faded, or rather, the awkward absence of it, when Prince Harry disappeared behind the heavy black curtains of the NEXUS Summit main stage. What the public saw was a rushed exit, a dropped stack of papers, and a man whose speech ended with a note of dissonance. What they didn't see, until much later, was what unfolded behind that curtain. What they didn't hear, until the leaked footage surfaced, was the sound of fury erupting in a corridor reserved for VIPs, staff, and select summit organizers. The moment was not intended for public consumption. but it became the most talked-about element of the entire event. The corridor behind the stage was quiet for less than 5 seconds after Harry's departure. Then came the raised voice. "I didn't give up everything just to be disrespected like that on stage." That line, caught by a secondary audio pickup meant for security communication, echoed through the hallway. It was unmistakably Harry's voice, gritted, firm, and elevated beyond his usual controlled cadence. The hallway, equipped with standard event security cameras, had no intention of becoming the scene of global scandal. The cameras were meant to monitor traffic and logistics, not catch royals in emotional collapse. But technology doesn't bend to intention. And what those cameras captured became a defining moment in the story: the unfiltered, uncontrolled, and unmistakable unraveling of a man used to being carefully presented. In the video clip that would later be leaked, Harry can be seen rounding the corner from the stage exit with 2 aides trailing behind him. One of them reaches out toward his shoulder, likely to guide or console, but Harry brushes past sharply. His jaw is clenched. He throws his cue cards to the floor in a loose arc, papers fluttering across the carpet. A nearby staffer bends down to gather them, but quickly retreats as Harry's voice pierces the air. "She did that on purpose. Don't tell me this was some oversight. You all heard it. Mr. Windsor." Like I'm some common guest lecturer. Rachel Gerol was already present in the hallway, standing near the security panel that managed stage entries. She doesn't move. She doesn't speak immediately. She watches him approach, arms folded, posture straight. Her expression is unreadable, not hostile, not apologetic. Just still. Harry stops within a foot of her. The proximity is invasive. There's tension in the air that thickens with every passing second. People in the hallway stop what they're doing. A videographer slowly backs toward a wall. A communications intern silently steps into a closet. Everyone feels it. This is no longer a private disagreement. This is a detonation. "You knew exactly what you were doing," Harry says again, slower this time. "I didn't come here to be made a spectacle of. That title is part of who I am. You stripped it off me like it didn't matter." Rachel doesn't flinch. She simply tilts her head. "I introduced you by the same standard we applied to every speaker here," she responds. Her voice is calm, quiet, but firm. No titles, just names and contributions. "You think it's that simple?" He fires back. "Do you have any idea what I've walked away from? What I've sacrificed? You don't get to stand there and act like this is about policy. You humiliated me." Rachel raises her eyebrows slightly. Still no aggression. No raised voice. "No one here is above protocol," she says. Especially someone who says they want to be seen as equal. That sentence hangs in the air like a suspended breath. The reaction from Harry is immediate. His hand flies to his temple. He shakes his head in disbelief, pacing a tight circle as though trying to cool himself down. But he's not cooling down. His anger is building, peaking, and it's now spilling out in every direction. The cameras catch him pointing, not at her face, but near enough to spark a visible recoil from a nearby staffer. Not Rachel. She doesn't move. She simply watches. "This isn't about ego," Harry growls, though everything about the moment contradicts that claim. "This is about respect. About legacy. Do you understand what it takes to stand in front of a room like that knowing every single person is waiting to judge whether you're still worth listening to?" Rachel replies in one line, without blinking. "Then earn it." Silence. Complete. For several seconds, the footage shows no motion. Just the two of them, standing in a standoff of principle versus personal expectation. Harry's chest rises and falls rapidly. His face is flushed. Rachel remains collected, but the slight tremble in her hand, clutched near the security panel, betrays the emotional weight of the moment. The leaked footage cuts off there, but multiple witnesses corroborated what followed. Harry stormed off toward his reserved dressing room, demanding that his team issue a statement. According to 2 staffers, he wanted the summit to apologize. He referred to the incident as a calculated public humiliation and threatened to withdraw support from future collaborations with any institution affiliated with the NEXUS brand. His aides were reportedly split. One attempted to calm him by offering to correct the media narrative. Another quietly whispered to an event coordinator that he wasn't supposed to react like this. Rachel, meanwhile, made no immediate response. She returned to her role within the summit, continuing to moderate panels and manage closing ceremonies. But later that evening, she quietly accessed the surveillance system through her administrative login. According to summit protocol, the backstage cameras were not accessible to general staff, but as CEO and chief security clearance holder, Rachel had full access. She reviewed the footage alone in the operations room, no press, no handlers, no advisors. After viewing it twice, she made her decision. She selected a 97-second clip from the confrontation and forwarded it, encrypted, to a longtime media contact with no identifying commentary. The recipient, a veteran investigative journalist working for an international newswire, verified the footage, ensured its chain of custody, and uploaded it with a simple caption. Footage from the NEXUS summit appears to show Prince Harry in an angry confrontation with summit CEO Rachel Gerol over an onstage introduction. Sources say he was addressed as Mr. Windsor rather than by royal title. No audio available. The story broke before dawn in Europe. Within hours, it had been viewed over 18 million times. The reaction was swift, brutal, and divided. Some called it an ambush. Others called it accountability. Commentators across media and social platforms dissected every movement, every gesture, every turn of the body in that grainy, soundless video. Professionals in psychology and PR offered conflicting interpretations. Was Harry triggered by disrespect or by a deep-seated identity crisis? Was Rachel making a point or setting a trap? The debate raged on, but the footage didn't lie. In those silent, unforgiving frames, the world saw a man breaking his own myth. A man who had spent years selling the story of personal reinvention but had not yet shed the need for inherited validation. A man who, when confronted with a space that treated him as equal, not greater, chose to demand reverence instead. And they saw a woman firm, unshaking, refusing to give it. In the days that followed, other angles of the confrontation emerged. A second camera, positioned outside the hallway entrance, caught Harry exiting the building visibly shaken, pulling on a baseball cap and ignoring reporters. Another internal camera showed aides scrambling to gather his belongings and cancel his scheduled media interview. What was supposed to be a day of global inspiration became a case study in modern entitlement and institutional resistance. But perhaps the most important legacy of that footage wasn't what it showed. It was what it revealed about the shifting dynamics of global respect. Because for all the titles, interviews, and curated documentaries, nothing Harry had said publicly could counter what was caught on tape. The unguarded reaction to being treated like everyone else. That, in the end, was the real story. And for many, it was the moment they stopped seeing him as a reformer and started seeing him as a man still haunted by the hierarchy he claimed to leave behind. In the storm of headlines, speculation, and virality that followed the release of the backstage footage, one voice was conspicuously absent, Prince Harry's. While the world consumed grainy video loops, debated body language, and dissected titles, the man at the center of the controversy disappeared from the public eye. No tweet, no press release, no carefully worded Archwell Foundation statement. Silence. But in that silence, others spoke on his behalf. The first signs of organized defense came not from Harry himself, but from a tightly woven network of aides, sympathetic royal correspondents, and former palace staffers still loyal to the man once known as the most relatable Windsor. Their comments, some public, others offered in whispers to the press, slowly constructed a counter-narrative. It wasn't about ego, they claimed. It wasn't about entitlement. It was about being blindsided, disrespected in a professional environment, and held to a double standard no other global figure would be expected to endure. Behind the scenes, a coordinated communication effort began to take shape. One of the first defenses came from a former senior communications officer at Kensington Palace, speaking anonymously to a London tabloid. Harry has always been clear that stepping back from royal duties didn't mean abandoning his identity. There's a difference between renouncing privilege and erasing your past. Being introduced by his birth name in a setting that celebrates global figures felt like a deliberate slight. The framing was careful. Not an excuse for the outburst, but a justification for the hurt. Shortly after, Omid Scobie, a journalist long considered close to Harry and Meghan, made a guest appearance on a popular UK morning show. While not directly quoting Harry, he offered a well-structured defense. "There's something important to remember here," Scobie said. "Prince Harry didn't demand people bow to him. He didn't arrive with guards wearing sashes or medals. He came to speak on topics he's deeply invested in: mental health, leadership, and truth. When someone strips away your public identity in front of a global audience, that feels like an erasure of your work, not just your title." His words resonated with a portion of the public still loyal to Harry's post-royal transformation. Many recalled his openness about therapy, his dedication to wounded veterans, and the trauma he endured losing his mother under the unrelenting eye of the press. Was this moment not just another case of the world being quick to punish him for a misstep born of accumulated grief and pressure? A key talking point in his defense centered around the idea of intent. According to sources close to Archwell, Harry had been told his formal title would not be used, but was allegedly under the impression there would be a compromise in how he was introduced. One aide, speaking off record, said, "We believed it would be Prince Harry, co-founder of Archwell, no Duke of Sussex, no royal stylings, but still acknowledging who he is. Instead, it was Mr. Harry Windsor, which he found cold, clinical, and pointed." This detail became a central point of contention. Several royal commentators suggested that the name Harry Windsor carried weight not only for its omission of his title, but because it was never a name he personally used. Harry Windsor was the name the media occasionally used to simplify or refer to him formally, but it was never how he introduced himself or was known globally. His brand, speeches, books, and even philanthropic work consistently used Prince Harry, in removing that was seen by his defenders as not just impersonal, but hostile. Royal biographer Angela Levin, whose views on Harry have fluctuated over the years, came forward with a more nuanced perspective. This is a man who spent the last few years trying to walk a tightrope. He's asked for privacy, yet he appears in public. He's rejected the monarchy, yet retains the identity. What we're seeing here is the breaking point of that balance, where someone else took control of the narrative, and he reacted with frustration, not calculation. That word, frustration, became a pillar of the revised narrative. Not arrogance, not superiority, frustration. Privately, other defenders pointed to the emotional toll the summit had taken on Harry even before the speech. Jet lag, press scrutiny, and reportedly a sleepless night filled with last-minute edits and internal disputes about tone. Some insiders described him as emotionally depleted before even arriving at the venue. One sympathetic guest speaker, a South African diplomat who shared the green room area, said in an op-ed, "When you are someone who has carried the weight of being both symbol and scapegoat, the slightest spark can feel like a betrayal. I saw Harry minutes before he went on stage. He looked exhausted. Not arrogant. Just tired. Tired of navigating spaces that celebrate change but punish the changers." This portrayal began to influence online opinion as well. Social media, which initially erupted with jokes, memes, and parodies of Mr. Windsor, began to see a shift. Posts under the hashtag #RespectHarry started appearing, mostly from fans, veterans groups, and mental health advocates who recalled his years of charitable service. "Say what you want about titles," one viral post read, "but Harry's earned his platform. If Rachel Gerol had done this to Mandela's grandson or Obama's daughter, people would be furious. Why is Harry different?" It was a fair question, and one that his defenders used to further build their case. In their view, the NEXUS summit had failed in its own mission of inclusion and empathy by publicly undermining one of its speakers. They framed Rachel Gerol's strict adherence to the no titles rule as rigid, performative egalitarianism that lacked cultural sensitivity. They argued that not all names carry the same personal history, and that context matters. A psychologist interviewed by a U.S. news outlet offered insight into the symbolic impact of Rachel's introduction. For someone who spent years trying to reclaim their narrative after trauma, stripping them of their identity in public, even symbolically, can feel like a wound being reopened. It's not always about the name. It's about what that name holds. Archwell itself, notably, refrained from issuing an official statement, but insiders leaked that Harry was deeply disappointed by how things played out. No lawsuit was filed over the leaked footage, but it was confirmed that legal teams reviewed their options in the 48 hours after the video went viral. Ultimately, they chose not to pursue legal action, perhaps calculating that public sympathy would be a more effective defense than litigation. Other high-profile allies came to his side. Tyler Perry, who once offered his home as refuge to Harry and Meghan during their departure from royal duties, reposted a message calling for grace over perfection. Serena Williams liked several posts in support of Harry. Oprah Winfrey, though silent publicly, was rumored to have privately reached out in support. Even President Barack Obama, when asked in a casual post-speech Q&A about the importance of identity in global forums, gave an answer some interpreted as a subtle nod to the situation. We shouldn't be so quick to flatten people's histories in the name of equality. Equity means understanding what someone brings with them, not just what they leave behind. That sentence made waves. It was reposted thousands of times and used as a springboard to suggest that the Nexus summit had, perhaps unintentionally, created a space that was equal in name but not in nuance. And yet, critics of this defense were quick to push back. If Harry had asked to be treated as an equal, why was being introduced like everyone else so offensive? If titles didn't matter, why did this one spark such rage? These questions haunted even his supporters and reminded everyone of the complicated nature of his identity. A prince by birth, a public figure by reinvention, and a man still in search of where he belongs. His defenders argued that the outburst didn't define him. They reminded the world of his years in combat zones, his advocacy for mental health, his groundbreaking work with the Invictus Games. They asked people not to judge a man by one moment but by the body of his work. But the footage remained. That silent confrontation. That finger pointed in anger. That loss of composure. So while the palace allies tried to reset the narrative, the world had already seen the raw, unedited version. A man not in command of a room, but overtaken by his own need to be validated. Still, in the tug-of-war between perception and intention, Harry's defenders carved out a space where empathy was possible. A space where trauma, fatigue, and identity struggles were understood not as excuses, but as context. A space where the clash between protocol and personhood could be seen not just as a scandal, but as a symptom of a deeper issue, the cost of living in two worlds, without fully belonging to either. At the center of the Nexus 2025 fallout lies a far deeper truth than a public outburst or a leaked video. It is not only about titles or protocol, and certainly not just about a single conference introduction. It's about identity, how it is constructed, how it is maintained, and how it is threatened. And for Prince Harry, this moment may have marked the most public unraveling yet of a personal conflict that has shadowed him since he first stepped outside the palace gates. A conflict between who he was born as, who he wants to be seen as, and how the world insists on seeing him regardless. The Harry Windsor of today is not the same boy who walked behind his mother's coffin in 1997 as millions watched in silence. Nor is he the uniformed soldier once photographed during a firefight in Afghanistan. He is also no longer the smiling royal beside Meghan Markle on the steps of Windsor Castle after their wedding in 2018. And yet, each of these versions of Harry continues to live in the public imagination. Each of them has become a frame by which people understand, praise, or condemn him. The trouble is, none of these frames fully match the man he's trying to become. When Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, the world was introduced to a new narrative. They were not rejecting their family, they said. They were stepping away from the institution. They were not demanding privacy, but rather boundaries. They were not abandoning duty, but redefining service. At the time, many sympathized. The pressures of the royal spotlight had long been known to exact a heavy price. Paparazzi harassment, tabloid cruelty, internal power struggles, and unrelenting performance expectations. In leaving, Harry framed himself as something more than a prince. He became, in his own words, a man, a husband, a father, a human. But as the years went on, something else happened. That rejection of the institution didn't quite lead to a clean break from royal identity. Instead, a paradox emerged. In speeches, interviews, books, and branded projects, the name Prince Harry remained intact. And not just intact, but central. The Archewell Foundation, co-founded by Harry and Meghan, leaned heavily on their global recognition. Book deals were signed not under Harry Windsor, but Prince Harry. Publicity for Netflix documentaries and Spotify podcasts often began with royal branding, even when the content was designed to be critical of monarchy. Even his best-selling memoir, Spare, was positioned not simply as a story of a man, but of a royal son finally speaking his truth. This dual existence, stepping away from monarchy while continuing to operate within its gravitational pull, created a slow-burning identity crisis. The global brand of Prince Harry became both his strength and his greatest vulnerability. It gave him access, but also scrutiny. It gave him income, but also expectations. And it made any perceived shift in how he was acknowledged, such as being introduced as Mr. Harry Windsor, feel not like neutrality, but like erasure. This is where the Nexus Summit confrontation takes on deeper meaning. To the audience, Mr. Harry Windsor may have sounded formal, appropriate, or even respectful. But to Harry, it likely sounded like exile. Not because of ego, but because of what it symbolized, a name that stripped away the last remaining connection to his global persona. And yet, Isn't that what he claimed to want? This contradiction lies at the heart of the problem. Harry has asked to be seen as a man apart from his royal status, but has continued to operate with the benefits that status affords. He's demanded respect for his personal journey, while rarely acknowledging that the interest in that journey is fueled largely by the very title he says he no longer needs. It's an impossible tightrope. One former royal communications officer, speaking anonymously, put it this way: Harry wants to be respected as a change-maker, but he's still trying to cash in as a prince. The world doesn't know which version of him it's engaging with, and I'm not sure he does either. This crisis isn't just about branding. It's about psychological continuity. Identity, for anyone, is built from past and present. For most people, these merge organically. But for Harry, the transition has been jarring. From military life to celebrity philanthropy. From guarded palaces to California media deals. From royal protocol to corporate contracts. And all of it while under the microscope of millions. Clinical psychologists who study identity trauma often point to moments like this, when external perception collides with internal confusion, as moments of psychological rupture. In such moments, even small perceived slights, like the way one is introduced on stage, can provoke disproportionately emotional responses. It's not the words themselves, but what they represent. For Harry, being introduced as Mr. Harry Windsor may have triggered not just anger, but a deep sense of existential loss. What am I now? That is the question lurking beneath every controversy. Am I a prince? A father? A veteran? An exile? An author? A victim? A leader? The answer, for Harry, seems to be all of these, and none of them. It's why he's sometimes perceived as inconsistent. Why some former supporters now accuse him of hypocrisy. Why his public image swings between reverence and ridicule, depending on the headline. Because without a singular, stable identity, every new appearance feels like a different mask. In branding terms, this inconsistency would be fatal for a corporation. But for a human being, it's not just bad optics. It's a genuine struggle for psychological coherence. And it's compounded by the fact that Harry's attempts to reshape himself have been so tightly bound to monetization. To make the move to North America sustainable, he and Meghan had to turn their fame into capital. That meant deals. That meant branding. That meant keeping the name that made people click, even as they publicly tried to step away from the system that gave it power. To this day, Harry's presence at events is often contingent on his title. Press releases still refer to Prince Harry. His name is still listed on panels and programs with that designation, even when others appear without formality. It's not always because he insists, but because audiences expect it. Because that's the version they recognize. The version they're willing to pay for. This means that any moment in which the title is removed, voluntarily or not, becomes a moment of identity rupture. Not just publicly, but internally. The NEXUS Summit was not just another speaking gig. It was an elite stage, curated to showcase global leadership. And in that environment, Harry was presented not as a prince, but as a peer. And it is here that the central crisis explodes. Because he wanted equality, but not anonymity. He wanted authenticity, but not irrelevance. Being introduced as Mr. Harry Windsor made that irrelevance feel dangerously close. This is the heart of the paradox. Royalty is not a job one resigns from. It's a birthright. But when that birthright becomes baggage and one tries to shed it, the world doesn't necessarily cooperate. For Harry, every step away from the monarchy has been measured by how closely he clings to the language, symbolism, and privileges of it. And when someone challenges that, when someone like Rachel Gerol strips away the titles and says, "You are here for what you contribute, not what you were born into," the foundation trembles. It's important to note that this crisis is not unique to Harry. All public figures who undergo transformation, especially those born into fame, face a moment when the persona and the person clash. But few navigate it under the same microscope. Few must watch their every mistake become a meme, their every misstep a global headline. Harry's journey is made more difficult by the fact that he has no private identity. Every part of his being is filtered through public perception, and that perception is fragmented. To some, he's a hero who broke generational trauma. To others, he's a hypocrite who profits from the system he claims to reject. To some, he's a loving father. To others, a privileged man cosplaying as a revolutionary. The truth may be more complex than any of those categories allow. But complexity doesn't sell. And in the era of instant opinion, Complexity becomes a liability. This is why the Nexus moment felt so defining. It wasn't just a man losing his temper backstage. It was the public collapse of a carefully curated in-between space. A space where Harry tried to be more than a prince, but still seen as royal. More than a victim, but still deserving of sympathy. More than a celebrity, but still given a platform. It didn't work. And now, the question remains, where does he go from here? Rebranding again would be dangerous. Doubling down on royalty might be perceived as backtracking. Retreating might look like defeat. And yet, some insiders suggest that this moment could be the catalyst for the next phase of Harry's evolution. A phase in which he finally lets go, not just in press releases or symbolic gestures, but completely. One senior branding consultant who has worked with high-profile figures in similar transitions described it this way: there's freedom in starting over. But it only works if you do it all the way. Right now, Harry's brand is stuck in purgatory. He's not royal. He's not royal. He's not public. He's not private. You can't build trust in ambiguity. That, perhaps, is the lesson of the Nexus Summit. Not that Harry failed, but that the middle ground he tried to occupy no longer exists. The public won't allow it. The system won't support it. And the pressure of maintaining it will only continue to erode his credibility. What he does next will determine not just his relevance, but his peace. Because until he answers that deeper question, what am I now? Every speech, every project, and every appearance will carry the same risk of collapse. The world has already seen what happens when the mask slips. The challenge now is not to replace the mask, but to live without one. At the Nexus 2025 Summit, global leaders gathered for unity, innovation, and diplomacy. But backstage, chaos erupted when CEO Rachel Gerol introduced Prince Harry not as royalty, but as Mr. Harry Windsor. Moments later, she leaked explosive footage of Harry confronting her, shaking with rage, accusing her of erasing his identity. Why did she do it? Why did Harry lose control? And what does this say about his future and his fight to stay relevant in a world that's moved on from crowns and courtesies? The footage is real, the reaction was instant, and the fallout has only just begun.